Hello. I am Prof. Jimmy Winfield and I teach Skillfully's Anytime Online RE5 exam prep course. It's great to meet you. In a few moments, I'm going to show you a free video that is going to teach you quite a lot of helpful information in order to start preparing for the RE5 exam. But before I do that, I want to speak to you because I know why you're here. You're on YouTube because you have been Googling some RE5 prep materials and you've got to this point, and that's because you are effectively using a strategy that we like to call Google and gamble. Now, there's a problem with that strategy, and that is, firstly, it's stressful, as this poor meerkat shows you, as they try to work through this exam over here. But also, it's expensive. Why? Because when you gamble, on the whole, you lose. And so, that first exam, which costs you 1,300 Rand just as the fee to write the exam, you have to pay it to Moonstone, not to us, not to Skillfully, but to Moonstone. Well, you're going to fail. And then you are going to have another go. And even if you get lucky when you gamble a second time and you pass, you still are going to have spent 2,600 Rand. Most likely, you won't even manage that. In fact, we've spoken to people who failed this exam 5 times. It is not an easy exam. So this Google and gamble approach doesn't work. What you should do is use our prep and pass approach, okay? We have just built our Anytime Online course, and we are, as a special promotion post-launch, virtually giving it away, right? We are charging only 575 Rand for it. It's 10 or 20% of what the course is really worth. The course is brimming with materials. You've got a full suite of study materials. You've got 18 videos, including the entire curriculum, plus an exams technique and strategy video. We've got loads of questions that match up with every video so you can check that you're learning as you work through the course. We've got 2 mock exams. We've got an RE5 exam chatbot. You name it, we've got it. It's an amazing course. You take that, if you take it properly and you are serious about it and you give it the appropriate amount of time and commitment, you will pass on your very first attempt at the exam and you will end up paying just 1,875 Rand. Now, I said just 1,875 Rand. I recognize that's not a small amount of money, but most of it is the exam fee. And it's a heck of a lot less than 2,600 Rand or 3,900 or 5,200 or whatever you might end up paying, given how many times you might have to write the exam if you take that Google and gamble approach. So don't do it. Take the prep and pass approach. Come to us. Now, 2 more things before I start rolling the video that you've come to watch. Firstly, let me just point out that the video you've come to watch is just one tiny fraction of the full course. So if all you do is watch this video and then go off looking for other free materials, you're using the Google and gamble approach and it's not going to work. This video itself is not enough. Rather, use the video to determine if you like our style, and if you like our style, click the link below and come and join us on the full course. Yes, it'll cost you 575 Rand, but if you have a head for finance, which you should if you're looking to build a career in finance, you can see that actually that's an investment in your future career that is going to save you money. And the second thing I wanted to say before we start the video is this is definitely a limited time offer, right? We are giving it away for a crazy price. I can't tell you when the offer is going to end, but it is going to end, and you don't want to miss out. You can, in fact, if you like, pay your money, join the course. We will give you 365 days worth of access to all of the materials. So you actually could potentially pay your money now, make sure you lock in this special price, and then only take the course, say, next month when you have the money to pay for the exam or when you have the time to prepare for the exam. Okay, that's enough. Why don't we take this video and hit play and you can tell whether you like the Skillfully Anytime Online style. Cheers for now. Over to you, Jimmy. Hello, I'm Prof. Jimmy, giving you the skinny. And a warm welcome to this, your very first lesson in your RE exam prep course. It's so great for us to have you with us. welcome. So, when you are learning the RE5 material, you need to make sure that you understand who all the main characters are in that material. There's constant references to each of these 10 characters. Let me tell you who they are quickly. You get a product supplier, a client, an FSP, a key individual, a rep, a compliance officer, a supervisor, the OMBUD, the Financial Intelligence Center, and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Those 10 characters are referred to constantly, and you need to understand who they are and how they relate to each other and what all the rules are about how they should behave. If you try to do an RE exam without really getting who the characters are, it's like opening up one of these novels behind me here, nice thick one like this, opening it to the middle page and starting to read. I don't know who these people are. I don't know anything about them. This doesn't make any sense. How am I going to remember what the heck is going on? You see, it's the same thing in the RE exam. So this lesson is designed right from the beginning to get you well acquainted with each of these characters so that you never forget who they are and what role they have to play in the whole story of the world of financial services. Let's get going. So before you meet the first character, I just want to quickly ask you this rather weird question. What is a person in the law? Now, you and I think of persons as people like you and me, right? Human beings. These are called natural persons in the law. But the law also makes space for a different type of person, and that is called a juristic or a legal person. So examples of juristic or legal persons are companies, universities, family trusts, in other words, entities. Now, you might wonder, why are these referred to as persons in the law? And let me tell you, it's a history lesson. Very quickly, once upon a time, there were no such things as companies and universities and family trusts. They were just people like you and me, flesh and blood individuals. And the law was written about us, what a person could and could not do. And then companies came along, universities were built, family trusts were invented. And I guess the legal folks were thinking, well, how are we going to make up rules about what these entities can and can't do? And they had the bright idea to say, well, why don't we just call them persons, and then the existing law we have about what a person can and can't do can apply to them too. No doubt they have to make up a few more laws because entities aren't exactly like regular people. But if you think about it, a company can do a lot of the things that a regular human being can do in the law, right? They can own assets, they can owe somebody some money, they can sue somebody, they can be sued, and so on. And so it just was easiest to call these entities persons too. What this means to you is you need to look out for which of the characters that we are going to meet in this lesson are natural persons and which can also be juristic persons. Okay, let's get started. Here is the first character I'd like you to meet. It's this beautiful honey badger, which we use to represent a client. At Skillfully, we represent all of these 10 characters with a proudly South African animal, and we will continue to use the same animals through each of these lessons. So it's a good idea for you to try to get into your head, okay, when I see a honey badger, that represents a client. Now, why did we choose a honey badger? Well, because a honey badger is always after honey, right? And so a client is after financial products in the same way, right? The honey here is representing financial products. Now let's make sure that we cover what we need to about the RE5 material in terms of what a client really is. Here's a definition. It's a natural person or a juristic person. That makes sense, doesn't it? Individuals might have money to use to buy financial products, but equally so might companies or family trusts or universities and so on. Okay, now a client is somebody who's going to receive financial services. But the second and third bullets there maybe require a little more explanation. What is it to be a successor in title? Well, that is a person who has obtained ownership from the previous client, right? So one example is where the previous client has died, their financial products are now in their estate, and an heir, or maybe many heirs, their descendants, are going to inherit these financial products. That makes them clients. Also, remember, since a client can be a juristic person, well, those juristic persons can be acquired themselves, right? Somebody can buy a company, and then, of course, they become the successor in title for the financial products that that company might own, right? So they are also clients. And then in the third bullet there, you see the term beneficiary. That is somebody who stands to receive a payout. Like, for example, I have life insurance. If I were to die, my wife would receive a payout. That makes her a client. I don't have a family trust, but if I did, I would make my children the beneficiaries, which would mean that they would receive payouts from the trust, so they would also count as clients. Now here, of course, is a beehive which makes honey. In the same way that the beehive makes honey, a product supplier makes financial products, right? They issue financial products. Whenever I show you the name of one of these characters, I will tell you all the other names that you might see them referred to as in our material or in the exam. So a product supplier is sometimes just referred to as a supplier. Try to get your head around that, get used to the different words that we use for the different characters. All right, here are some examples of product suppliers. You'll be familiar with at least two of these. There's Old Mutual at the top, and in the middle you'll see Outsurance, both insurers on the list of registered insurers in South Africa. You'll see some other names there that perhaps you won't recognize. Orange Insurance Limited and Peregrine Life Limited. There are product suppliers of all kinds of shapes and sizes, some of them big enough for you to know, and others much smaller that you won't know unless you happen to have interacted with them. Bear in mind, this is just insurers, and there are all sorts of other kinds of product suppliers too. Something else you will notice on this list is that some of the names appear more than once, like for example, Old Mutual is in the first and the second row. And the way to understand that is to actually look at the second column, and you'll see that the first time Old Mutual is listed, it's a non-life insurer, and the second time is the life insurance company that Old Mutual has registered. Now, a life insurance company, of course, sells life insurance policies, but non-life companies, well, they sell all kinds of other insurance policies, like maybe vehicle policies or home insurance policies, medical policies, and so on. So this is just a little test of what a product supplier might be. I hope these examples help get your head around it. Okay, so back to our client and the product supplier. Now, in the wilds of South Africa, I suspect that quite often the way that a honey badger gets honey is it goes straight to the source, straight to the beehive, and grabs the honey, right? Now, that can also happen in the world of financial services. The client can go straight to the product supplier, right? A client could go to Old Mutual and say, I want to take out life insurance with you, please. That can absolutely happen. There's no laws against it. But often a client rather would like some help. And who do they get help from? Well, from a go-between. The fancy word for a go-between in the law is an intermediary. And what we call this intermediary is a financial services provider. They also go by the name FSP, or you might see them just called a provider, or even sometimes they're referred to as a licensee, because, as you're going to learn, an FSP needs to get a license. So if you receive a license, you can be referred to as a licensee. All of those terms might describe an FSP. What does an FSP do? Well, they render financial services to clients in respect of various financial products issued by the product supplier. Now we might get to the definition of what financial services mean in lesson 2. In fact, we will. But first, let's just talk about the different categories of FSPs. There are 5 of them, and you might expect them to be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but in fact, they are numbered 1, 2, 2A, 3, and 4. And I'll explain to you why in a moment. Let's look at category 1. It's actually the kind of hardest one to understand, I think, because it is the category that represents all of the FSPs that don't fall into one of the other categories. Okay? So let's move on to category 2, which is called the discretionary FSPs. Discretion is the ability to make up your own mind about something. And so a discretionary FSP makes investment decisions for clients without checking in with the clients about each of those decisions and getting their specific instructions. Okay, let me give you an example. A client might go to Alan Gray and get a unit trust, buy into a unit trust. What does that mean? Well, it means that they buy a bunch of units which represent a tiny little share of a massive fund. In the case of an equity unit trust, it'll be a fund that owns all sorts of different companies' shares. Now, the very clever analysts at Alan Gray are making decisions every day about which are the best investment prospects. Maybe they want to sell some Pick and Pay shares and they want to buy some ShopRite shares or whatever it might be. They don't want to have to go and check in with a client to see if they can get the client's permission for that. And in fact, the client doesn't want them to do that either. The client wants them to be free to make the best decision that they believe on the day is the right one. And so that's why Alan Gray would have a discretionary FSP license, a category 2 license, so that they can make those decisions and hopefully enrich their clients without a long back and forth process. Now, here's the explanation for why the next one isn't called category 3, and that is because it's actually very like the previous one. So category 2A actually has FSPs in it which also exercise discretion. They make investment decisions without consulting clients, but these are of a very specific type. They are hedge funds, which means that they use special complex strategies to try to increase returns to investors without exposing them to the risk of market fluctuations downwards. That already sounds pretty complex, I think, as it comes out of my mouth. You don't need to understand this in any detail, but what you should know is that it is kind of like a variation of a discretionary FSP, but it's sufficiently different that it's got its own category. It's just that they've given it the number 2A. So the next one is category 3, and that's quite different from everything we've talked about so far, because in fact this is the administrative FSP, and what it does is it has systems that allow the product supplier and the client to be linked in such a way that the client can actually move products between different product suppliers. You can imagine that this involves quite a lot of quite complex information systems, and so it's quite a lot more sophisticated than the very last category, which is the simplest of all of them. That is called the assistance business FSP, which really administers just one kind of financial product, and that is funeral insurance policies. All right, let's see some examples. Here is an example everyone knows of, Standard Bank. You can see here I've got this information off the FSCA's website. I'll explain to you in a few moments what an FSCA is, and you can get quite a lot of information there. In particular, what I want to show you here is that Standard Bank is a category 1 FSP. What you can also see in that table is all of the different financial products that Standard Bank has a license to render financial services in respect of. Let's move on to Alan Gray, which is a category 2 FSP. As I mentioned before, it needs to have a discretionary FSP license, and that's because, amongst other things, it administers collective investment schemes, which is just the fancy legal term for unit trusts. So it is making investment decisions on behalf of clients without asking for their specific instructions for each transaction. Something else to notice about this table is that Alan Gray isn't just a Category 2 FSP, it is also a Category 1 FSP. And so that's something you might not have known before, that one FSP can fall into more than one category. In fact, here's another example. I hadn't heard of Aon before, but they are a hedge fund, so they have a Category 2A license, but they also fall into the Category 2, and in fact, you can't see it here because I've cut it off in order to be able to fit all of this list, or at least the important parts of this list, onto the slide. They actually have a Category 1 license as well. Then there's Ntimbeko, which you may have heard of. We generally refer to them as administrators, and that's because they have an administrative FSP license, Category 3, as well as a Category 1 license. And finally, here's an example of a Category 4 FSP, NBC Holdings. They're not just a Category 4 FSP, they are also Category 1, but they have to have a Category 4 license so that they can administer the funeral insurance policies that make them an assistance business FSP. I went and checked on their website, and sure enough, here is the funeral cover that they administer, which requires that special Category 4 license. Okay, what I haven't talked about so far is how we have illustrated the FSP. You can see there are 4 animals surrounded by a ring of sticks, which is called a boma. Now the boma itself is the FSP. Inside it are 4 new characters that I want to introduce you to now. And we're going to start with our favorite, the meerkat. It's our favorite because you may well be a meerkat, or you're hoping to become a meerkat, and that is because it represents a representative. Okay? What is a representative? Well, it's somebody who is employed by an FSP or mandated by an FSP to provide financial services on the FSP's behalf. What does mandated mean? Well, it means that they have a written mandate which authorizes them to offer those financial services on the FSP's behalf, even though they're not actually employed by the FSP. Now, a rep can be a natural person or a juristic person. You're not going to come across juristic person reps very often, and generally when you're approaching the RE exam, it's safe just to think of reps as natural persons, but do just commit to memory the fact that it's possible for them to be juristic persons too, little entities that operate as representatives for an FSP. Okay, let's move on to the next animal, and for that we have chosen the king of the jungle, the lion, because it represents the key individual who's basically the boss in a financial services firm because they manage or oversee the financial activities of that FSP. Now, a KI must be a natural person, right? And I think that's required by the legislation because the legislation wants the buck to stop with a real person, a flesh and blood person who can be held accountable. And so try to remember that. Lions are going to stop bucks, aren't they? Right? In the wild. Similarly, key individuals, because the buck stops with them, they must be actual natural persons. Right? Another fact that you need to know about key individuals is that every FSP must have at least one of them. This is true only of key individuals. An FSP can have no reps, and it can have none of the giraffes and none of the cheetahs. We're going to get to who they are soon. But it must have at least one key individual. The cheetah represents a supervisor, who is a person at an FSP who offers mentoring and coaching and support and guidance of various types to a supervised rep, also known as a representative under supervision. That's a kind of more junior rep who is still trying to become fully fledged. They're still working to meet the competence requirements that I'll teach you about it in a later lesson. And while they're doing that, they have the supervisor appointed to kind of take care of them and shepherd them through the process. Remember, the buck stops with a lion. A buck is also going to stop with a cheetah too. So a cheetah also needs to be a natural person. It can be a key individual, but it can also be a senior experienced rep. And the last animal inside the boma, the last character at an FSP that you need to know about is the giraffe. The giraffe has a long neck that allows it to look down on the FSP, see everybody and what they're doing. And so we've chosen it to represent the compliance officer who's in charge of making sure that everyone at the FSP is complying with the financial regulation. Now, compliance officers actually can be natural persons and usually are, but they can also be juristic persons, in which case they are called compliance practitioners. Some of the smaller FSPs maybe don't employ a compliance officer themselves, but instead employ the services of a firm known as a compliance practice to play the role of compliance officer. All right, now we've got through all four of these, but I've already mentioned to you that not every FSP needs to have a cheetah, needs to have a meerkat, needs to have a giraffe. When they don't, that's probably because they are not, in fact, juristic entities. They are natural persons, right? Just a regular human being can actually become an FSP. In that case, they are called a sole proprietor FSP. And that person is also the key individual of the FSP. So the lion and the boma are kind of one thing, that is the FSP, right? And the key individual. Here's an example. I've never met Nosipho Xaba, but she is a natural person who has a Category 1 FSP license to render financial services in respect of long-term insurance subcategory A. And there you have it. She will be the key individual of her own FSP. So far, I've introduced you to the characters whom I like to say are on the ground, right? Interacting in the world of financial services to try to make sure that clients are getting the products that product suppliers produce thanks to the help of FSPs with all of the different characters inside of them. But there are also three more characters who are up in the air overseeing and regulating this world of financial services. And they are the Ombud, the Financial Intelligence Center, and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. Let's meet each of them. So, the Ombud is responsible for independently handling complaints that clients have brought to FSPs, but the FSPs haven't dealt with satisfactorily. So the Ombud has to liaise with the FSCA, otherwise known as the authority, and the FSP and the client to resolve the complaint. And of course, if it's going to do so independently and objectively and fairly, it needs to have wisdom. Wisdom like an owl, and so we've used an owl to represent the Ombud. Then there's the Financial Intelligence Center. They're responsible for combating money laundering activities and the financing of terrorist activities. And in order to do that, they require the FSP to gather a huge amount of information and to send a lot of that information as paperwork across to the FIC. And because from the FSP's point of view, mostly what the FIC is requiring is a whole bunch of paperwork, we thought we'd represent it as a secretary bird. And finally now, probably most importantly, there is the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, the FSCA. You might see it called just the authority for short, and you might even see it referred to as the registrar, which is kind of an older name in the older legislation, which now refers to the FSCA. Look out for that. What does the FSCA do? Well, it has a big job. It regulates the conduct of all of those players on the ground, right? All of them. So the FSP, the rep, the key individual, the compliance officer, and the product supplier are all overseen by the FSCA, which we've represented with a fish eagle because it's got very sharp vision, it's alert and checking out everything on the ground, and as soon as it sees something it doesn't like, it swoops in and intervenes to make sure that everything is actually the way it should be. The FSCA is based in Pretoria, nice building over here. It was brought into being by the Financial Sector Regulation Act, which gave it a 4-part mandate. And this isn't actually on the exam, but I want to show it to you anyway because it will help with context and help you understand why the FSCA is going to come up so much in all of the lessons that I've got for you. And it's really the first 2 parts of the mandate which explain how it comes up in the RE material. The first is that it is there to enhance the efficiency and the integrity of financial markets. And the second is that it must promote the fair treatment of customers by financial institutions. Now that is a big job, it's a serious job, and I can tell you that the FSCA is a serious outfit staffed by serious people. I can tell you from personal experience. Once upon a time, I was delivering a presentation in person to a whole bunch of chartered accountants, and I was telling them a story about a friend of mine who'd started working for an FSP and very quickly discovered that the FSP was effectively defrauding their clients, and he quickly quit that job and moved on to a different one. And when I gave the group a break, at the very next break, these 2 very serious gentlemen in very serious, very dark suits came up to me and they said, Prof. Jimmy, we need to know more about that friend of yours and the FSP that he worked for. And I felt it was like a scene out of Men in Black. You know, I was waiting for them to hold up that device and ask me to stare into it so they could clear my memory. Before they did that, fortunately, I could tell them, hey, listen, he reported all of it to the FSCA. I helped him do it. And so don't worry about it. You guys already know about this one. But that is the kind of serious people that they are. There are a couple of other parts of their mandate. They're there to help maintain financial stability and to provide financial education and to promote financial literacy. Those 2 parts of the mandate don't come up so much, but I thought you might like to know about them anyway. All right, that's it. We've come to the end of your first lesson. Your job now is to move on to KC1, the first knowledge check, which is all about the material in this lesson. It's going to test you to see, have you understood it? Can you remember it? And it's going to start building up your muscle memory so that you don't lose the parts of this lesson that are most important. And also, it will help you start to develop your exam technique. Because after all, why are you watching me give this lesson? So that you can nail that exam, which means you need to be good at answering MCQ, multiple choice questions. We're going to give you a lot of them in this course, and your first ones are going to start now with this KC. You need to get either full marks or you can get 1 answer wrong. Then you pass the KC and the second lesson will open up for you. If you don't pass the KC because you get more than 1 wrong, that's okay. Don't worry. You can have another go. You can have as many goes as you like until you get it all right. And then the lesson 2 will open up and you'll be able to come back to me and I will see you in that lesson soon.